Good morning, folks. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to let everybody have a chance to hop on. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. I see we have folks that are continuing to hop on. Good morning. I'm Travis Wood. I'm the Senior Director at Citizens for Modern Transit. And on behalf of CMT, welcome to today's Talking Transit event, Winning Messages for Transit, highlighting successful transit expansion campaigns in Minneapolis, Austin, and Kansas City. Welcome to the CMT board members joining us today. And special thanks to our platinum sponsors, AARP in St. Louis, Bi-State Development, HNTB, and the St. Clair County Transit District. We appreciate your support. Public transit is a critical component of any region's transportation system, whether you ride it or not. Yet many communities struggle to fully recognize and clearly communicate the value transit brings to the economy, personal mobility, and overall quality of life. This challenge becomes even more important when sustained public understanding and support are needed, especially at the ballot box. As the St. Louis region prepares to open the newest MetroLink extension to MidAmerica St. Louis Airport in Illinois and explores bus rapid transit along the city of St. Louis's Northside-Southside corridor, Citizens for Modern Transit has brought together transit leaders from various cities to share how they built successful transit campaigns. Today, we'll take a behind-the-scenes look at major transit initiatives in Austin, Texas, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Kansas City, Missouri, along with the messaging strategies that resonated with the public. These case studies highlight how effective communication can turn transit projects into broadly supported community investments. Let's welcome our panelists. We have Tom Underwood, Senior Transit Project Manager at HDR, who will discuss the Project Connect Transit Expansion Campaign and project in Austin, Texas. Ron Forrest, Executive Vice President and COO of Metro Transit here in St. Louis, who previously served as Deputy COO at Metro Transit in Minneapolis, will share insights on a successful campaign to introduce bus rapid transit in the Twin Cities. And Tom Gerend, Executive Director of the KC Streetcar Authority, will highlight efforts tied to the expansion and ongoing success of the KC Streetcar system. There's a lot to be excited about when it comes to transit in the St. Louis region. At the same time, it's essential that we continue learning from other cities about how to effectively tell the story of transit so that St. Louisans understand its value and get on board, whether they ride or not. So we're going to start by having each of our panelists provide an overview of the projects they worked on, including what worked well and what required a pivot for a winning campaign. So as a reminder to everyone on our webinar today, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So we are going to start with Tom Underwood and the story of transit expansion in Austin, Texas. And I will get your slides up right now.
All right. Thank you, Travis. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Not sure if you're familiar with Austin, Texas or not, but it's really expanding. There's a lot of companies that have moved there. The population is increasing. I believe just a couple years ago, it was, just under 2 million, and they're projecting that Austin will grow to 4 million by 2040. So it's really expanding. What used to be just a small college town is now a hub for many businesses and people wanting to relocate there. So next slide. So the Austin Light Rail Phase 1 project was designed not only to improve mobility and connect affordable housing to jobs downtown, to provide mobility choices for folks in Austin, but it was also intended to to deal with a lot of the traffic that is already in Austin now. One of our messages was, we're not going to reduce the traffic with this project. We're going to keep the traffic levels the way they are today when it's 2040, when there's double the population. So let's get into this a little bit. The light rail transit corridor is 9.8 miles long. It's branched. You see the Lady Bird Lake, which is actually the Colorado River going through the middle of the project. That dashed line that you see on the map is the elevated section. So as you can see, most of this is at grade in a dedicated guideway along existing transportation right-of-way. So it crosses if you're going from north to south, it crosses the Colorado River and then branches off down Congress Avenue and then on out to the airport. It stops short of the airport at this point, but there are plans for it to go further and connect to the airport. There are 15 stations. There is a operations and maintenance facility, which is that blue dot in the bottom right corner next to the airport. We're about at 30% design. We have just finished the FEIS and ROD in 2026. That was a huge milestone for the project and for the region. Currently, we are in what is called project development within FTA's Capital Investment Grant Program. So it's in project development. The next phase is to enter into engineering. So that's that EIE. We're going to enter into final engineering from 30% to 100 in this summer. There is a progressive design build contractor on board working on that now. The schedule is for construction to begin next year in 2027 with revenue service in 2033. Next slide, Travis. So the project itself is actually part, as Travis mentioned earlier, it's part of a broader Project Connect program, which included about 7 bus rapid transit lines, some upgrades to an existing commuter rail line, and light rail. The funding was from a 2020 voter-approved property tax dedicating 8 cents, roughly 9 cents, of the city's O&M budget to the program. So that's pretty healthy. But that got them off the start, and that got them to develop or allowed them to develop the project sponsor, which is the Austin Transit Partnership. That is a Capital Metro, who is the current operator of transit in Austin, and the city of Austin. Combined, they cooperated and formed Austin Transit Partnership, and right now ATP has roughly about 75 employees that are assigned for implementation of the project as a whole. The project cost is $7.1 billion at this point, and that's a combined of that voter-approved property tax and then the anticipated federal CIG match. The lead federal agency is the FTA, and they will be providing, obviously, the capital investment grant oversight. And again, the schedule is 2027 with revenue service in 2023. Next slide. So this really got off the ground in 2018, 2019, where our original scope involved 2 corridors. For about 20 miles. It was an orange line that went north-south, and then there was also a blue line that extended and went all the way to the airport. Both of those lines connected to one another in an underground subway that went underneath the Colorado River. It also included a bridge for the blue line. But essentially what was determined in 2023 is the scope was just too much for what the budget could withhold. So they combined the 2 projects. They shortened they kind of clipped some of the alignment off of each end. They did away with the bored tunnel underneath the Colorado River and relied just on one bridge over the Colorado River. At that point, we were already into the capital investment grant program, project development. We were also had issued notice of intents and had already started to prepare EIS documents for both the orange and the blue. So we had to retool, we had to pull back, we had to rescope the project, we had to rescind the notice of intents in the Federal Register with FTA and kind of start anew with the new combined project. That last bullet, you can see that it started with project scoping, and then we had a public hearing on this new EIS. Next slide. So lessons learned, combined with when you're looking at the green line, we had to retool. We had to go back out to the community and say, we had 2 projects. We now have 1. We had to explain to them and make sure that they understood the reasons behind the change and emphasize that the original objectives of the project hadn't changed. We were still seeking, increased mobility, connecting jobs with affordable housing. And eventually we would go to those different areas. We would make it to the airport. We would make it further north. We also had to explain how the federal funding worked. As you know, transit funding is competitive. So, and it doesn't, the local match typically does not pay for the entire project. So when communities voted for this tax, they thought their tax was going to pay 100% of the project cost. We needed to make sure that they understood that the financial constraints associated with the local match, but how that local match helps support leveraging federal funds going forward. We had to set clear expectations of the timeline. We had public meetings for the orange and blue. We combined the project. Now we had additional meetings for the new project. We needed to explain why we were having so many meetings, why they were different, and what the trajectory of the project was. Public needed to understand what had happened before and what was anticipated to happen in the future. We wanted to, like I said earlier, we wanted to continue to showcase mobility and the economic benefits of the project, which is what was promoted to garner the tax in the first place. We needed to make sure that the core goals of the project had not changed. We just scaled it down in order for it to be affordable. And then we invested in promotion. We promoted the new project. We made sure that we reached out to the different areas along the project and helped them form their own committees to help inform the design. So it was a very active time for when we made that switch. And again, I go back to the St. Louis Green Line, where we're making that switch from LRT potentially to BRT. So all of these points that I pointed out here could help in making that switch. Included in that was some online promotion and explaining of the project. And Travis, I don't know if you have that YouTube video that we talked about potentially showing. This is something that Austin had put together and did a pretty good job of explaining the change.
Yep, I'm gonna give that a go right now.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
This is Austin, Texas. We don't sit still. Now we're getting a whole new way to go with the city's very first light rail. And there's room for everyone on this.
Hey, I have a question.
Oh, hey Brad, what's up?
This light rail, will it have a lot of stops?
15 stops, and they're in places Austin, I'd love to...
I have a running question. Will it go to the hike and bike trail?
Yeah, and it's right on the line. Okay, anyone else have
Will we be able to take it to ACC?
Yeah, St. Ed's and UT too.
Cool. To our favorite local spots?
It'll go to some of Austin's most visited places.
Okay, so I can take it to my job?
Yep.
What about my job?
Yes, Chef.
And even my job?
It'll create access to all kinds of jobs. Yeah, all the big festivals.
You know what I want to know? Is this train going to be loud?
No, it's electric, so it'll be quieter and run cleaner than most other trains.
Electric, I like that.
Will we be able to bring mats on the train?
Yeah, and bikes too.
And our tacos?
You know it, just don't forget the doña.
What about our horses?
Yeah, no. Sorry, Gray Horse.
Oh.
Catch you later, man.
You know what would be really cool? If it went to the airport.
It will, as part of future extensions.
That's huge.
Yeah, but are we gonna have to wait a long time between trains?
No, trains will run about every 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, where was I? Light rail is coming to Austin, and there's room for everyone on this train.
Great. Thank you, Travis. That concludes my presentation.
Right, fantastic. Thanks, Tom, for going over that with us. And next up, let's turn to Ron Forrest, who prior to coming to St. Louis, worked for the other Metro Transit in the Twin Cities and worked on the expansion of bus rapid transit. Looks good, Ron.
Trying to take myself off of mute. All right. All right. So good morning, everybody. As Travis said, I'm Ron Forrest. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for Metro Transit, but I spent a couple of years out in Minneapolis, and I was privileged to be working on a couple of BRT projects. And so I'm going to be speaking about that experience in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I want to start by saying that the Twin Cities, they built a really effective playbook for BRT, and they didn't do it all at once, right? I was able to participate in, like I said, several projects, the biggest being the Gold Line, which you see up here on the screen. This was a 10-mile dedicated BRT line. It had 16 full amenity stations that included heating. It included real-time passenger information at the station stop level, off-board payment systems, all-door boarding, so that we had quicker boarding times. And this line here connected the outer suburbs of the Twin Cities area to downtown St. Paul, and eventually to downtown Minneapolis with a connection to the light rail station and also to the football stadium. Now, Minneapolis, they started small. They started with what's called BRT Light, things like, dedicated lanes. And throughout this presentation, you'll see pictures of the things that I'm talking about. But dedicated lanes, signal priority, better stations with off-board payments systems, again, for faster boarding. Now, that alone made a notable difference in speed and reliability to the passengers. And once Minneapolis, St. Paul, once they were able to prove that this works at a small scale, they actually scaled up. They moved into a more fully built out BRT that had dedicated infrastructure. And in some cases, even grade separation, so you're not dealing with that traffic interference. So it's a great example of starting practical in Minneapolis, building trust, and then scaling in a smart and deliberate way. But I do want to start. I want to start with something honest, the challenge, right? What's the challenge of implementing BRT? All right. So when BRT was first introduced, and Minneapolis has been doing BRT for quite some time, and in fact, I would say that they are in the top tier in the industry of BRT implementation. They roll them out almost every year, right? But like we see here in St. Louis, a lot of folks, weren't sure of what to make of it in the beginning. Minneapolis, they faced the same skepticism about whether BRT would deliver real tangible benefits compared to the traditional bus service. And in fact, we heard the same thing over and over. It's just another bus rather than a meaningful upgrade. So we had to confront that challenge. And we did so by reframing the conversation, right? So instead of talking about the technology or the terminology, things that people found it hard to understand, we focus on outcomes, right? on what matters to the community. So instead of selling BRT, we sold what BRT was designed to do, which was, we sold speed. Again, signal priority, bus queue jumping, dedicated bus lanes. We sold reliability. We sold convenience, experience, the heated shelters, bus benches, off-board payment systems, real-time trip communication at the station level. And those three terms, that speed, reliability, and experience, that really guided every decision that was made as we had this discussion about BRT. There were several BRT projects, BRT light projects mostly, and each one had its own footprint and its own impact. So even though there was a standard playbook, there were modifications and revisions that had to be made when you actually spoke about a specific BRT project. But once those first BRT lines opened, something really important happened. People felt the difference, and that's what we were going for. Trips were faster. Buses came when they were supposed to. Stations felt safer. They were more comfortable. People could turn on heat during the winter. They were fully sheltered. Credibility. So those early wins, they really helped build trust. They brought credibility. But that didn't come from Metro Transit alone. Of course, we needed the community. We need to hear from the community. So we needed to hear from everyday riders, community members sharing real experiences. We had forums where local business owners who benefited from increased foot traffic. We heard from employers and institutions who relied on transit access for their workforce and their students. It came from trusted neighborhood leaders who could speak directly to how transit improvements like BRT actually help improve their communities. So we reached out to those people. We explained to them what this was, and we encouraged them to advocate, and they did. Those voices helped us explain the value of BRT better than any brochure or press release ever could. All right. Part of the playbook was conducting extensive upfront research, and we're doing the same thing here in St. Louis, and I appreciate the approach that's being taken here. We made sure our decisions were data-driven. We looked at ridership patterns to identify high demand corridors. We looked at equity needs to better understand, who would benefit the most. We conducted community engagement events. We're doing the same thing here in St. Louis. We conducted surveys to gauge priorities and concerns and to understand where BRT could make the biggest impact. It also allowed us to tailor both service design and messaging that actually reflected the community needs, getting out there and talking to the community, getting their feedback. That's critical. Now, I hinted at this earlier, but BRT, it can sound complicated, and surprisingly, it can be difficult to explain when you're talking about things such as, signal priority, off-board payment system, dedicated lanes, queue jumping. And it's relatively new for many residents. So what Minneapolis did, they invested in a strong public education effort, with a goal to be able to just explain BRT simpler. Be real simple about it. We wanted people to understand what they'll experience and not really get lost in all of those technical details. So we had a simple, clear explanation for how our BRT differs from local bus service. It's fast, it's frequent, it travels in its own lane, right? That was the messaging. That was the education. We created visuals and branding that really distinguished BRT. Stations look differently, and buses had different wraps and route identifications. The BRT lines in Minneapolis, their letters and their colors. We have A, B, C, D, E lines. We have the gold line, red line, orange line. they have that. And this is easily distinguishable from those local lines, which normally have numbers like Route 1, 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera. So we were clearly able to distinguish through branding and visuals. BRT was something different. All right, concerns. So look, we know that, with any major project, that brings that not in my backyard concerns. People want to know who's going to be coming in my neighborhood, who's going to be traveling through. They want to know how construction is going to affect them. Are we going to be losing any parking? How will I be able to get downtown and or the central business district and park my car if I want to, right? They want to know where stations are going. They want to know how the service will change their daily routines. And so, we tried to meet those concerns by being very transparent and flexible. That means that we had to show up, we had to listen, and then we had to make adjustments when we can. We had to demonstrate that flexibility. For communities resistant to change, the approach was, early and should be always early and continuous engagement, not one-time outreach, but frequent, continuous engagement. Being transparent about the trade-offs, lane reallocations, parking impacts. Those things are important to the community. Showing before and after data from existing corridors. So, if you have a corridor that's successful, it makes it a lot easier for people to be receptive of additional BRT. Also, a part of breaking through that resistance required constant emphasis on the local benefits, improved access to jobs. That should always be the theme. That should always be the goal of not only BRT, but public transit in general. Improved access to jobs, increased property values. We know that property values increase the closer they are to public transit. Safer, more organized streets. This is a really good example of how you can integrate this picture here. How you can integrate, bike-only lanes with bus-only lanes and have that separation from regular vehicle traffic. This is a picture of San Francisco. I also worked on this project. This is the Van Ness BRT system. This actually took you from the ocean front into downtown San Francisco. So this was one of the projects. It was took a long time to get this project done because San Francisco is such an old city, but I thought it would be important to show you all this. So the biggest takeaway is that, successful transit projects are not just about the infrastructure. They're about trust and relevance. Minneapolis showed that, when you focus on the customer experience, you engage communities early and authentically, you use data to guide decisions and messaging, and you deliver visible, reliable improvements, you can build strong, sustained support for public transit. Like I said, Minneapolis, they open up a BRT line almost every year now. People are used to it. People want to see that. And through all of this, we've learned a powerful lesson, right? If the service feels relevant to the community's life, if it gets you to work on time, helps your kids get to school, if it makes it easier to reach doctor's appointments, then it becomes a part of the community, right? So looking ahead, I do see a huge opportunity for BRT to help build a future where transit is first choice mobility option. This is taking off all over the industry. Yeah, BRT is not only more cost effective than light rail, but it provides the flexibility to scale up or scale down, right? We want to make sure that it's something that people choose because it's fast, reliable, and easy to use. And quite frankly, we can't get there without the community. So glad to have an opportunity to speak about this, the community's feedback, their stories, their advocacy. Those are what make BRT successful. Yeah. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks so much, Ron. And now let's turn to Missouri, and we'll have Tom Gerend talk about the expansion and success of the KC Streetcar. Take it away, Tom.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to pull up my share here. Okay, can you see that?
Not quite yet. There we go.
Okay, well, good morning. Happy to be here, and I think you'll hear some common themes from both Ron and Tom's prior presentations, and what we have to say in Kansas City about where we're going and some lessons learned. I think you all know the history of regions around the country. Kansas City was no different. We had a long storied history of high capacity transit. Our city was built around it. Streetcar in particular was very influential in how we grew and connected our city, and had one of the largest systems in the country at the time of decommissioning in 1957. And really, since that time, we spent a lot of effort, years and decades, with unsuccessful attempts. So one of the things that's sort of an early lesson learned that I'll just convey from the outset is this stuff's hard, right? These projects take a long time. They require staying power. And for us, we had multiple unsuccessful attempts. And it was continuing sort of the cyclical pattern of learning, listening, and adapting, and continuing to think about what are the opportunities and ultimately not giving up. And so even when we had a path to implementation, these projects take a long time, whether it be BRT or rail projects, and staying the course and being connected to a vision is really, really important, because typically these are going to span multiple mayoral administrations, elected officials, and it really is important that we have continuity and agreement on priorities, regional priorities, local priorities, and how these projects will be beneficial. So for us, we learned from a lot of failures, and it wasn't until 2010 and 11 where we sort of got our feet under us. We had the political support, right, the champions to take some risks. These big projects are expensive. We need advocates who can help stand behind making the case. And again, with that big picture vision in mind, and use community engagement and support to move beyond the naysayers, because you're going to have all of that in any kind of big sustained initiative. And so our efforts led to our opening in 2016 of our 2-mile modern streetcar route in downtown. And, lots of false fears that, people wouldn't ride, it wouldn't be safe, it wouldn't generate the economic development. And so combating those false fears, right, having a champion, staying the course, telling the big picture story, Ron sort of mentioned that, is really, really important. Why are we doing this? Being connected to the why is really important. And for us, that was the purpose and need around connect, develop, thrive, and sustain. It was about more than just connecting people. And we weren't shy about telling that story, about the role transit could play in building and connecting our communities, creating vibrancy, bringing people and jobs back. And then obviously we had post-opening and the impact. And it's really important that, in the transit agency world, it's easy to just bury your head in the operations, right? We got the hard work done, we built it, we opened it. We continued to tell the story and track data and information about, are we doing what we said we wanted to do around those pillars of connect, develop, thrive, and sustain? And so tracking public opinion and ridership and being transparent in that data, and reminding people, here's what we've said we were going to do, here's how we're faring, whether that be good or bad, and in demonstrating to folks that This wasn't just about turning it on and operating it. We want to do this at a high level. And so things like customer satisfaction surveys, statistically valid surveys, collecting data, polling our riders, how are people feeling? And for us, the response was overwhelmingly positive. And we were able to parlay that into a plan to grow it very quickly. In 2017, we started to work on Main Street Extension and Riverfront, and I'll talk about both of those briefly. But so we started small, we built on our successes, we tracked information and public input, and then we grew that public support into a broader vision. And we opened the Main Street Extension in October, this past October, 3.5 miles, $352 million, the largest project Kansas City's ever done. And really transforming our service from a downtown circulator to a spine of a regional system. And, 8 new cars, dedicated lanes, starting to blur the lines between traditional streetcar and light rail in many respects. And here's just a few pictures of streetcar service in operation and the Plaza Transit Station, which integrated cross-platform bus connections to Johnson County in Kansas and South Kansas City. So positioning this line as a connector of our broader regional network was really important and helped to, again, put this into context that, yes, it's streetcar, it's rail, but it's all part of a regional integrated plan for connecting our region at a much higher level and being thoughtful and intuitive about all of this. And what did we see after we opened? About a tripling of ridership. We were forecasting about 12 to 13,000 trips a day. And this is just through December. We're seeing days with over 20,000 trips. And obviously this spring already, we're seeing days in excess of that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in a few months we're carrying 40 to 50,000 trips on a 6.5 mile streetcar spine in the core of our city. So here's just a few pictures of the before and after of the transformation. This was about transit and connectivity, but it was also about redefining a main street that was previously 6 to 8 lanes wide. It was a highway through the core of our city with vehicles moving too fast, unsafe sort of pedestrian environments. And we had an opportunity to reshape this, leaning heavily into transit to have transit only lanes, transit connectivity, and improve pedestrian accommodations up and down the street, just basic sidewalks, ADA crossings, as you might imagine, curb ramps, and then slower traffic speeds and pushing the traffic off the curb and landscaping. So that project opened, and then we're quickly transitioning. And in parallel with that, we've been working on the riverfront extension to the north. And together, these will really bookend, again, growing our route into a north-south spine that'll be approximately 6.5 miles long at conclusion. And we're a few months away from opening our riverfront extension. Much smaller project, $61 million, 3/4 of a mile. Small doesn't mean easy. And for us, both of these projects required a different user group, a different set of stakeholders, a different financial approach to paying for them. So obviously, building financial strategies around where there's support around the impacts of the project for us has been how we've advanced our efforts. We are looking regional, but when we're looking at projects, we're looking project specific. How are we advancing this project? How are we creating new local money? In this case, we're collecting revenues off of new development, and we're using those to match new federal funds. And both strategies for Main Street and for Riverfront were different in that sense that there were locally generated revenues that really necessitated local support. And here's just a map of that purple line we're building, getting ready to operate, and that will build a northern terminus on our Missouri Riverfront, and has been an anchor for development announcements that have transpired over the last 36 months, really 3 to 4 years since we announced this project and started working on it. For decades, we sat with an empty riverfront, disconnected from the core of our city. And we painted this picture, this rendering, back in 2016 when there was no development on the riverfront about what connecting the riverfront could do to activate the development opportunity. And again, all part of a big narrative. Back in 2016, many of the responses is, why would we go to the riverfront? There's nothing there. And with the Port KC and other partners, creating a vision for what this could be, about the power of connectivity for us was what we needed to compel local support and federal support that we incrementally captured over years to advance this. And here's what we're a few projects, pictures during construction of the bridge, the 2-lane bridge that existed with no bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, and then obviously Riverfront Trackway. And here's some pictures of streetcar testing down at the riverfront as we're getting ready to open it in just a few short months. So it's been amazing to see and people understand, again, the power of this connectivity, how it can be built in to the bigger story for the kind of city we're trying to create. And so we're a means to an end. It's not about the transit system. It's not about the fancy streetcars. It's about what are we creating in Kansas City long-term? What's the 50-year plan for how we're building out our core of our city, and what's the role of transit in connecting it? And that's where we fit in. It's a streetcar. We've been a catalyst to that bigger vision for what our city can be. And of course, all of this has created a greater magnetic pull. We started downtown and now we've extended north and south. And now that we're extending north and south, we're closer to more places. And as we expected, we're seeing a lot of public interest in how do we extend the reach? How do we extend the benefits? And it's a different conversation than making the case. It's actually sort of how do we manage expectations? How do we develop strategies to continue to make progress? Streetcar is not the right mode for all of our transit. So you see here the map connected to Truce BRT and Prospect BRT. Obviously, there's a host of local services that underpin these routes. And so identifying what are the corridors that are the right candidates that fit the model of what we're trying to do, about what we can bring, and then how do we supplement that with other resources. And most importantly for us, probably regionally, is we've been piecemeal in these individual efforts because we've had to be. But as we grow the impact and we scale, we need to make sure our regional system is underpinned sufficiently financially. We could advance projects, but if they're not connected to sound operations capacity for connecting services, right? Multi-jurisdictional funding sources that are long-term. We've got work to do in Kansas City on regional funding for transit beyond these capital projects. And I think our efforts will be looking to link streetcar expansion to the broader regional conversation about the funding of our regional transit system, and frankly, leveraging our momentum to help propel, hopefully, a more productive regional conversation on that front. So thank you all for your time. I look forward to the conversation.
Right. Thanks, Tom. And I know there's going to be just a few folks on the streetcar when the World Cup hits town, so I'm sure you're ready for that. Well, I appreciate each of our panelists giving us an overview of their regions and projects. I think there's a lot to learn here in St. Louis from their stories. And I think you each touched on some of those challenges and that these efforts spanned, quite a length of time and in many instances. So I guess if each of you could kind of touch on what were the biggest challenges that you had to overcome for these projects and how you did that or try to tackle that through messaging. And just as a reminder for the folks on our webinar, you can leave your questions in the Q&A tab function there. So whoever wants to go first, what would you identify as your biggest challenge and how did you try to tackle that with your messaging?
Well, I'll go first, maybe, but our biggest challenge, and it was each project had their own unique challenges. Riverfront, was sort of COVID time, cost escalation, supply chain. We had a $25 million shortfall in resources, and we had to go out and find it creatively and then make the case that it was still worth doing. So that was that challenge. Main Street was at a time when we still didn't have great political support from the city of Kansas City. We had opened the streetcar project downtown. It had been very successful, but political support, might be surprising, was still not quick to come, right? And stand behind us as we think. And in fact, there was a prohibition on the city participating in expansion plans. So we as the Streetcar Authority had to take the planning process outside of City Hall. We had to source and fund an effort at risk to try to get to a federal grant so we could bring the city back in. So as we talk about staying power, right, you're going to have obstacles. And for us, it was, right, building a coalition of folks who believed in the vision and then finding an alternative path to sort of overcome those. But it was actually the front end work on these things because they take so long, right? And they're expensive. And you don't have the immediate, right? We're all about instant gratification. And we're talking about efforts that might be 10 years off. So those first few years of the due diligence, Tom talked about the project development, the process they're going through in St. Louis and Austin and other places, right? That front end is hard. You're planning engagement and building the vision and then the momentum to overcome the challenges that you're inevitably going to have. So for us, that it was really that, kind of telling the big picture story and keeping people motivated.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, like Tom said, every project is unique. And so, we have to consider the footprint that that project is having on that particular community. The biggest challenge for us in all of the BRT projects that I've been in, not just Minneapolis, but San Francisco, was going through convincing people that it's worth the investment. It's worth the trade-off of having BRT go through those, those high density downtown areas where businesses were, where they had their own parking, those central business district corridors. You had to convince those business owners who were the most resistant to that, that there would be an increase in foot traffic, that the trade-off was, you may lose parking in front of your business, but these buses are going to be coming in San Francisco. They were coming every 6 minutes, right? They're going to be bringing lots of people to that central business district area, and it paid off. So I would say, like I said in my presentation, early and frequent communication, listening to what they have to say, and bringing data, right? Supporting this decision with data, and also showing how transit investments actually increase economic outcomes in those downtown and CBD areas.
Great.
Thanks, Ron. Sure. I want to echo what Tom said. It's the staying power, but it's not just the staying power on the project sponsor, the agency. It's the staying power with the public. And for Austin, every big project has its challenges. But when we transitioned from the two project program to the single project, we had built momentum publicly. The momentum was cooking. We had everybody on board. We then changed. The challenge was to maintain that momentum, not only the staying power for us and the leaders, but the staying power for the public. So we did things like, we had to get up and over to maintain that momentum, to maintain the interest. So we did things like we did tabling events at, say, 5K runs or another community event. We made sure we were out there, we were visible. We visited heavy bus stops to talk to people. What did they like? What are their problems? We also helped the community organize. So we organized around central neighborhoods or communities, went out there, created task force, and actually gave them action items to do for the next meeting, to try to pull them in, to try to maintain the momentum. So the biggest challenge was, when we made that shift, was to maintain that momentum. And how we did that is we did even more than what we did before. We needed to show that this project was still, the goals and the objectives of the project were still intact. We just needed to shrink it and wait for the time when we could expand it, which we're expanding now, going to the airport. So
it's great. Looking beyond the challenges, I'm wondering, for each of your projects, and I know they're each different and kind of tackled bigger or smaller visions, but what did you find messaging wise, I guess, resonated the most? And I know, that's from the sort of, groundswell grassroots effort. Tom, I know in Kansas City, I was there for the opening of the Main Street expansion, and there was a lot of excitement there. Like people were pretty fired up. How is the messaging directed to maybe some of the grassroots versus political, economic, et cetera, and kind of what did you find was the most successful strategies there?
Well, for us, yeah, grassroots was fundamentally important, particularly at the beginning, right? When we did, and we had very localized engagement, and part of that was our strategy for how we're funding and financing these projects. We're really very locally adjacent to the projects, asking people to contribute, et cetera. And so we leaned very heavily into neighborhood leadership. And I mentioned this isn't about the streetcar, it's about the vision the neighborhood had, a vision starting with downtown stakeholders. We polled, we did a traditional alternatives analysis, and we said bus versus streetcar, pros and cons. Here's what we could do. 95% of the downtown residents said we want downtown streetcar line. And that gave our elected officials some cover. Said we're not talking about a citywide tax. We're not talking about, this is a downtown motivated investment. We're bringing creative funding and financing, and they backstopped the elected officials and our mayor when we started. And we did the same thing for Main Street, leaning into the Midtown Business Association, the vision they had for revitalizing Main Street in Midtown. And this was part of that plan. And so this was never streetcar forward in the sense that we were out pushing streetcar in the neighborhood. We leaned in to the neighborhood, the local folks and the local council district members to say, man, we want to do this and we're willing to pay for it. And we said, all right, we're facilitators at that point. Then we're going to help do the hard work, the technical work, right, the process work, the FDA coordination. But we let them really tell the why and make the case. And that served us very well, particularly early. And as we built momentum and there was broader public acceptance, then people were happy to jump on board, right? When it became clear we were going to do it, we had answered the hard questions about how we were going to pay for it. But it was really that local engagement and leadership, neighborhood leadership, that was helping to defend this as the right thing to do.
Ron, Tom, something that really resonated?
Yeah, I mean, Tom, he said it perfectly. What resonated was, like I said, keeping the messaging simple, fast, reliable, convenient, getting the community involved, like Tom said, getting them involved in the decision-making process so that it is not something that we are making the decisions on, but we are incorporating their feedback in this so that they feel certain ownership in the project. So that engagement really resonates when people have an opportunity to, to voice their opinions and provide input. Also, equity, the equity analysis, we can't overlook that, right? We're providing access to people who otherwise would not have access to jobs, to community events, to areas that they would not be able to travel to because, they're transit dependent. So that really resonated. Being able to provide access to jobs means that more people can, participate in gainful employment, which boosts the economic outcome of the region. And so that really resonates. So we focused on those kitchen table aspects of BRT.
Yeah, I agree, Ron. Just real quick, an example of what we experienced in Austin was the public wants to be heard and not just saying, oh, yes, we heard you. We've noted your comment. They want to see action based on their comment. So an example of that was very, very late in the 30% design, the residents along Congress Avenue, it's a 4-lane road with diagonal parking, and it's lots of small shops. It's got a really nice downtown feel, if you will, but they were concerned about losing their diagonal parking. We were doing that because the city was not reluctant they were reluctant to give us another travel lane. So we were squeezing it in. We were taking their parking. They all came and said, look, that's really going to impact our businesses. We were late in the design. So we paused. We continued to look at, we developed a feasibility study. We gave it to them to look at. What are the options? We took it to the city. We brought them to the table. So again, it's listening, but it's also tangible action that they see. They commented. We're in response doing something. It's just not lip service. We're actually, investing in a feasibility study. We're pausing. We're taking the time to listen and to find the right solution.
I would also say, like, timing matters for these things, and you have to be honest with yourself in terms of the context and the community sort of opinion and position in terms of what's viable, right? And how much do you want to push a boulder uphill, right? If the hill's too steep. And I'll just give an example. In 2014, while we were building the downtown project, before we had opened it, still tons of skepticism. The mayor tried to advance an effort to start the work on the Main Street extension south and two eastern expansions to East Kansas City. And if you know a lot about Kansas City, we've historically had this sort of racial dividing line at Troost, and his motivations were super well intended. He wanted to bridge that divide with transit, not just on Main Street, but east. But that also necessitated a larger taxing jurisdiction. And we had zero trust from the east side of Kansas City that this would be beneficial, that the benefits would be real. The taxes were too high. The financial impacts were too high. It failed, passed on Main Street, failed on the east side poorly. And thus we picked up Main Street and moved it forward. And now that we've operated the system for 10 years and we've advanced the Main Street extension, we have the east side folks, and we're advancing an 18th and Divine study saying, we want to come back to the table and talk about how to do this the right way. We think the timing now is better, right? The community opinion has changed. We've been able to see it in action. So we have more faith and trust in what the end result will be. And so for us, it's about monitoring, where is the community really? Have we done enough groundwork to have this be viable? And is there the community support? Because the community's got to lead on these big things.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and timing matters and flexibility matters. And, Tom made a really good point about the diagonal parking. And we had a similar situation. And so, that flexibility, like I said, it matters. What we were able to do was, instead of eliminating all of that parking, we were able to install queue jumping, where we allowed the buses to get out in front of that regular traffic and go around that parking. So we were able to salvage some parking in some of those corridors. So that's just a demonstration of why that flexibility matters, and hearing from them and being willing to make some adjustments.
Great. Since we're getting a little close to the end of time, I'm going to combine my next question with the final question that we always ask. But just talking, and I think you've touched on it a bit, just in terms of opposition you faced in your projects and how you tackled that, whether that was directly or just by staying on message. And Tom, I think you alluded to some of that as just timing too, and kind of getting trust over time and having transparency and showing success over time. But if you could talk about how you handled opposition, and maybe what that opposition was, and then just kind of add in your key takeaway for everyone in St. Louis exploring transit expansion here with BRT, in terms of what you would say is the most important for moving forward with this opportunity right now.
Well, our media and our strategy was to be proactive, with the motto that if we're not telling our story holistically, and I'm not talking about the in the weeds project details, those are important, but I'm talking about the big picture, why we're doing this, the benefits, what we hope to achieve, connecting the community leaders to those messages. We had sort of a media strategy that we were going to continue to push out stories. We're going to have 3 stories in the can at any one time. for why we're doing this, good news stories, progress stories. We're not hiding when we have issues. We're not, but people, we've got short memories, and it's transit operations, it's construction, it's funding. There's going to be hard stuff, and it's really easy to get laser focused, and the negativity, the folks who just want to throw stones are going to pick up any little challenge that the process has. And we have to continue to address those things, but continue to reinforce the big picture, 30,000 foot, why we're doing it, the transformational impact, why it's worth proceeding, connecting advocates and champions to those messages and narrative, because we forget. And what we found was media loves streetcar stories, and they're happy to tell the really bad ones. But if you give them good ones, they're really happy to tell those too. And they'll tell you, they'll tell whatever story we provide them pretty much. And so building strong relationships with media and being really proactive on the big picture, address the challenges, but be very proactive on the high level sort of talking points, narrative, have a strategy, invest in capacity. The first position, I was the first employee at Streetcar. I hired two people, an administrative position and a marketing communications position, right? In order to do this, you got, and that's social media, that's building relationships with the media that are real, that have staying power, right? Those pay dividends long term. And you got to invest in that capacity if you want to be able to do this at the level that's going to be necessary. And yeah, be proactive would be my number one thing there.
Great, thanks. Ron?
Yeah, I just say, look, real quick, staying on message is important, right? Using your elected and community advocates to support the messaging, and also using your data to make it make sense, right? Using historical context, using examples of other successful projects in other cities, and make it make sense.
Yeah, Travis. So the naysayers, they're going to be there. You might be able to convert some, but others you won't. And what we did in Austin, and believe me, Austin is an educated, very proactive, engaged community. We would have 500 people easy at our public meetings. We reached out to our naysayers and our opponents. We made efforts to go meet with them. One was concerned that we hadn't been to their neighborhood, so we actually went to their neighborhood committee meeting and had a little spot to talk about the project. Took some heat, took some pretty tough questions, but we never stopped reaching out. We never said, hey, they're just going to give us trouble. Let's not talk to them. It was we accepted it and we helped and we directed our attention to it. Your second question was what do you feel about the future of St. Louis and how this applies to St. Louis? A quote comes to mind. There was Charlie Hales was the mayor of Portland back when the Portland streetcar was being developed. And he retired and actually came to work at HDR. He's now since retired from HDR. But he used to tell us a successful community project has three things. It has heat, streets, and political leadership. The heat being the grassroots, the drive, the community that wants the project to happen. I think we have that for the Green Line in St. Louis. Streets, do you have room? Are you going to displace people? Is it going to change something that's needed or a valued infrastructure? No, there are some challenges along the Green Line for St. Louis, but for the most part, you have the streets, we have the room. Then it comes to political leadership. We've got the political leadership as well. We just need to get them organized and pointed it all in the same direction. So, with that, I think that St. Louis is set up appropriately. And they do have the heat, streets, and the political leadership. They just need to execute it.
All right. Well, thanks so much to each of our panelists today for sharing their insights and their projects. I think this is really important messaging and information for us to take in here in St. Louis. Thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. We're going to share a recording of the presentation and a recap blog with everyone registered for the webinar, as well as via CMT's website, social channels, newsletter. And don't forget to check out CMT's Talking Transit podcast. You can listen to this conversation as well as previous conversations we've had. Look for information on CMT's upcoming events at cmt-stl.org. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.